So what's your dreams, bro?
Well, right now it's I want to become a dancer, so I do like breakdancing and choreography stuff.
Yeah.
And I want to be a philosopher, professional philosopher.
Professional philosopher. Why a philosopher?
I study things like ethics. I focus on ethics and knowledge, how we come to know things. I love that. I love philosophy, and I study a little philosophy of religion as well. That's why.
So what do you think the meaning of life is?
So, meaning of life questions are I'm kind of like agnostic, because that follows from my agnosticism on like things like God's existence, because I don't know if there is a God.
Yeah.
So like, right now the type of I live, when I say the meaning of life, I just talk about what I want to see out in the world, what I want to do with the people around me. So things like I want to live for my friends, I want to live for my family, I want to live for, create a world where I see more happy people, stuff like that.
Yeah. So you don't believe in God?
No.
Why?
So I think there's really good evidence against the God's existence.
Like what?
So I think, like, for example, I think something like the existence of embodied minds is like evidence against the God's existence.
What do you mean by embodied minds?
So like the fact that we have minds and they're themselves existing in a body,
Yeah.
I think it's unexpected on something like a God existing. The reason why is because if you have a hypothesis, if you have like the God hypothesis, God exists, right? And by hypothesis, I'm not saying anything. I don't mean anything derogatory.
No, that's not weird.
When I say like the God hypothesis assumes something like a disembodied mind,
Yeah.
a mind without a body, and then so that's fine as a hypothesis. Then you have another hypothesis, let's say something like naturalism.
Wait, so you're saying the mind without a body? What do you mean by that?
So you have like a God, it would be like a mind without any physical stuff that confines it.
So what if it's not a mind? What if I don't believe it's a mind? What if I just think it's God?
Well, it depends what you mean by. Then I don't know what you mean by God, because typically when the people talk about a God, they talk about something like a mind.
So I believe in a creator. Like, so for example, I believe that it wasn't like random accident that the Earth was formed in this way, and the intricacies of it, and then the way that humans were made, and things like that. I believe that there had to be some type of intelligence behind that, something that something that like it's just too much, right? Like it's a lot. So like, how do you explain that if you don't believe in it?
So let's before I answer that.
Yeah.
Let's say when do you think intelligence, like if something is intelligent, it has a mind?
So, but I believe that's just a word. So it's just a way to verbally explain it. I can't contemplate what God really actually is. I just know that something created. I know there was a creator. So maybe creator is a better word, but even that's limiting because God is multidimensional. So he doesn't just create.
So would you say something like the universe is like a God?
No, I'd say that there's an actual being. I don't know exactly what that being is made of that created the world. And I think that the evidence historically and scientifically proves a lot of this as well. So like from like a scientific perspective, we can trace it back to the Bible. I believe in Jesus. I do.
I believe Jesus existed.
So you believe it, but I believe he's God.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
Yeah, so that's the difference. And then the reason I believe it is because of word of mouth testimony. So for example, there was 500 people that believe that Jesus did resurrect from the dead, which somebody resurrecting from the dead is not really human-like, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of like crazy, right? And there's 12 disciples, and these 12 disciples went as far as even letting themselves die upside down on the cross, getting burned alive for this like supposed lie. If it was a lie, they went to the death with it. Nobody goes to the death with a lie. So then that story's crazy, but then you're like, okay, but the Bible's fake, right? And then you can go down that path, which is like, but it's right now has the most evidence out of any historical book on the face of the planet.
Okay. So there's, I think, three things there.
Yeah.
The first thing is about the 500. First thing, I think I can agree that 500 people saw them. That doesn't mean that that's the best assumption to go with, that there is a God. I think something like, it depends. So how familiar are you with like things like Occam's razor? Like the simplest explanation is the better explanation, right? Okay. So the best thing to posit, like there are other types of views about religious views that like posit things like, I think it was Buddhism that specifically posits like supernatural entities, but they do not necessarily have to be gods, right? Something like that.
So a guy resurrects from the dead. The simplest answer would be what?
I could say something like, let's say, I grant you that, let's say, hypothetically, he resurrected.
Yeah.
I don't accept it, but we
Okay.
can go back to that.
Yeah.
It's like, let's say, I accept the existence of things like disembodied agents. That doesn't mean a god, because you can have limited agents, right?
So the disembodied agent verbally from his mouth says he's God, resurrects. Is that so? Like he has a lot of credibility. You understand what I'm saying? So if somebody resurrects from the dead, I mean the amount of credibility behind him is absurd. I mean you're probably gonna listen to him, right?
Well, hold on. In what sense do you mean he said he's God?
He specifically in the Bible multiple times said, "I am God."
I don't remember him saying specifically word for word, I am God.
I am.
I said like I am the. He's like I'm the. I am that I am, and I've heard also like from the begin something about from the beginning.
I am that I am, and he also said that I'm the truth, the way, and the light. You can only go to the Father except through me, which is basically isolating himself.
Okay, perfect. That's all. That's fine because I think that's compatible with what there's a view about the mind, about souls existing eternally. We view souls that have existed eternally. That doesn't mean that how familiar are you with philosophy?
I don't dabble in philosophy. I just got encountered by so my story is I got encountered by a supernatural being, bro. Like no textbook, no pastor, no church. I'm telling you right now, like tinfoil hat alien supernatural being came to me and said they were Jesus. Okay. And then I can't explain it. I felt the most.
I understand. I'm not expecting you to like explain it or anything.
Yeah.
So the thing is that type of evidence. Okay, so I think evidence is personal in the sense that like that might give you evidence to believe you that type of entity does exist. I don't think that gives me any evidence to suggest that God exists.
Similar to that has statistical evidence that could lead you to believe. So for example, one thing, if you do look into it, you should, is NDEs. You ever heard of near-death experiences?
Yes.
So there's like the vast majority of, if you look into it, the vast majority of near-death experiences claim that they see Jesus. Like the vast majority of them.
What's the overwhelming religion though?
What do you mean overwhelming?
What's the majority religion across the world?
The majority religion, I believe, it's like Muslim and Christian, and
What's the number one religion?
I don't even know, to be honest.
I think it's Christians.
I think it's
Because of Catholicism.
I think it is probably because
Well, don't you think that's expected? Not because of something, because I feel like that could be explained pretty easily. That could be explained because of the fact that like there's like we have an overwhelming amount of Christians the reason why you would expect to see is like proportion. But if you look at the proportions, the reason why you see an overwhelming being Jesus related is because we have an overwhelming the proportion is more towards Christians, people who believe in Christianity. It's kind of expected.
Okay, so
expected.
So I, look into it because there's specific. There's a guy that studies this, and I was watching his videos, and he basically said that like there's hundreds of millions of NDEs, and a lot of them claim.
I agree with that.
They claim Jesus, but you're saying because Jesus is overwhelming religion.
Yes.
But he's saying that there's like a vast majority of them. There's statistical evidence. For example, you can't really deny this. Someone dies, they see their body from a third-person perspective. They go into another room, and the person is OCD, memorizes a serial code on like a scalpel, comes back to life, says they seen Jesus, and can recite the serial number and exactly what the surgeon's doing in the other room, and they shouldn't know that information. So for example, in that case, they were conscious to a certain extent to be able to say something that they don't know, and then they still claim Jesus. So in that case, it wasn't they just felt like it was a memory. It was something they actually experienced. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so there's two things I want to say to that. One, it's like, I think that's also consistent with like things like substance dualism, which is a lot of atheists hold like a type of, there's some, I know specifically a philosopher, Michael Humer, holds to substance dualism, which is like, there are such things like souls leave our bodies. Yeah. But another thing I want to say to that is something like, the experience of having like your soul leaving your body is like consistent with something like extremely vivid dreams about like have walked across the street. Like for example, have you ever heard of like people who take like really strong drugs?
I do it all the time. I used to.
Oh yeah, but like who took a really strong drug and then they have a feeling where they like sunk in out of body experience.
Yeah.
I think what's going on there is kind of like their mind they're familiar with the room, and they kind of like it's kind of like how I can close my eyes and I can think of myself walking across this street,
yeah.
But that's amplified.
Yeah.
That's amplified to a significant. It's like a crazy dream.
How do you explain the fact that they knew data and information in another room.
Well, I can attest to that because I don't know anything about that specific.
So that's the thing that the invader. That's the thing he uses, and he dumbfounds everybody. No one can really explain that. So there's like 20% of these people that have NDEs can explain things they shouldn't know.
Wait, so why can't someone have seen it and just forgot it through the near-death experience?
Because
why isn't that an explanation?
So we're talking about a surgeon. You can't go into a surgeon. It's impossible to go into a surgeon room. So this is a specific case where there's a guy doing surgery, like open heart surgery. You can't get into that room, and they're able to say specific code, like on the scalpel that they memorized. Like there's no possible way they could be in that room. It's impossible. So there wasn't like a remembering experience. They essentially pulled data from another reality they couldn't have been in unless there was supernatural involvement.
Well, the thing, it's not that the dumbfounding is not coming from not me being able to explain what's happening. I think the dumbfounding just is coming from specifically, I don't know all the details about the scenario. Because for example, let's say if you have an instance where you have like some of the people who are talking about serial codes, passing around things like serial code XYZ, marking down numbers, or you have like, is it possible that the person can avert it? Is it also possible that the person could have like seen it before they fell into this call before they fell?
So there's unlimited possibilities. So
I'm so sorry. Yeah. But what I'm saying is that like, it's not the dumbfounding is not coming specifically from my lack of explanation. It's coming from my lack of detail about the explanation.
Understood. So that's where it's like, I always talk to people about this, and it gets really deep. And like I was talking to somebody else very similar. You're obviously you could explain it a lot better. But when I ask people this, if you don't have a way to explain everything, then what are you clinging to? Where's the consistency? Because at the end of the day, your mind shifts with new information. So as you go through life, let's say you read a book about a philosopher, another book about a philosopher, and you keep going down this direction, and then you perceive the world, and then you have another thought that changes the way you think. What source of truth do you cling to? And the reason I say that is because it's just think of it not from a religious perspective, but from kind of like a mental mind consistency thing, like a growth in the mind, right? Let's say we have two people, one person that's kind of going through our reality, making it up as he goes. And then we have another person that found one source of truth that has an absurd amount of credibility behind it. Like we're talking about credibility to the point where people say Jesus' name in a derogatory way and they don't even believe in him. That's how famous he is. I mean, Aristotle, Socrates, these guys were preaching for 60 years. Jesus' ministry for 3 years. And somehow he's the most famous person on earth in a lot of cases. He probably is the most famous person on earth. You understand what I'm saying? So like, there's like a significant source of truth. Like it's significant. Like the Bible is, even if you don't believe in Jesus, the Bible is.
I believe in Jesus.
I mean, even if you don't believe Jesus is God, the Bible is the most significant historical source of like anything we've ever, like historians look at it, not even from a religious perspective. There is no bigger source of truth historically than the Bible. You can look this up. This is actually a scientific fact.
Well, that's assuming God's existence.
No, I'm saying
I don't believe in.
So I'm not assuming God's existence. I'm talking about a historical document.
Okay, about what? What specifically historical details?
For example, like what's his name was confirmed. King Solomon was confirmed. So there's like they found King Solomon in the Bible.
Yeah. Okay, I think you're right. They found every good, but I think that's true for almost any story. I think every good story has some kernel of truth. Like for example,
what is it called again? It's not archaeological evidence. There's a specific name for it. I forgot what it is. It's historians. They basically rate the credibility of a historical document. I forgot the exact name. I can't believe it's not carbon dating. I forgot the name of it. But it basically it has like 500 duplicates. Oh man, you should look. I feel like you'll love this. Look into it. There's basically 500 confirmations of the Bible, and then the runner-up is like 23. So from a historical document, not from a religious perspective, it's like the most confirmed historical document on the face of the planet. Like, look into this. Like, I wish I knew the name of it. But long story short, the reason why I'm saying this is the way I live my life, and I used to live like very similar to you, but in a different way. Like I would look at other things, right? And I would go through my experiences, and I got a lot of success. The way I look at life is I adhere to a source of truth that has a lot of credibility. If I see another source of truth that has more credibility than this original source of truth, then I'll shift. But go ahead.
Yeah, well, the thing is that like I don't believe the Bible is credible in the claims about the. I don't mean this derogatory again. The more supernatural things. the non-natural things.
NDEs. I mean, I would say otherwise. I've researched deep and I've experienced it.
But the thing is that like even NDEs, I don't think gets you to God.
So the people that in NDEs claim they see God. They claim they see Jesus.
I know they claim, but that's also expected on whether a majority of people are Christian. I think that's what we would expect to see.
And I would say that there's also data, like what I was explaining to you, there's data that proves that they were experiencing it and not just taking it from their memory. I believe these people were alive. They were actually operating. Like it wasn't from their memory. They were experiencing reality in another dimension. And there's proof behind that.
What I'm having issues with is like, I'm not an atheist, to be clear. I'm agnostic. The point is that I want to say is that NDEs are specifically are consistent with specific atheistic models, like models about our bodies, like us not being material, having souls and stuff like that. And that's what I'm trying to get at. Is unless you, I don't know how much time you have, but I wanted to like see if I have some arguments against a God existing. So I want to see if you wanted to like attack me.
Hit me, right? We don't have nobody else. Good.
Okay, perfect. So like going back to the embodied minds, right? I think all I see when I look around, all I see is like things like embodied minds. So, like for example, I think if a God existed, what we would expect to see is something like us encountering a lot more disembodied minds. So minds that kind of like stuff like spirits.
Yeah.
But that's not. I've never experienced spirits.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the people that I've encountered have not experienced spirits. And the thing is that when they do experience spirits, I have a lot of conflicting accounts of like different specific models about what it is to be a spirit or what it is to be a specific religious group, stuff like that.
So what would you say? Would you say, for example, if somebody got up off a wheelchair and they couldn't walk, would that be like a representation of like a disembodied mind or a spirit?
No, I don't think that has any bearing on the.
So like it's a miracle.
No, I would not call it.
You don't think miracles are evidence of a supernatural?
What do you mean by miracle?
So, for example, somebody that can't walk, they